I'm 81 years old, and there are things I have not said out loud in 55 years. I've been a good woman by most accounts, a faithful wife, a working mother, a neighbor who did not cause trouble. People in this county have trusted me with difficult things, a sick child, a kept secret, a body that needed laying out before the family was ready to face it. I was steady. That was what they called me. Steady. I did not know for a long time that steady was just what silence looks like on a person who has learned to carry something without showing the weight. I am going to say now what I have not said, not because it will do any good. I am past thinking it will do any good, but because I am 81 years old and I am tired of folding it up each morning and unfolding it each night and putting it back where nobody can see it. I saw something during the war, not battle, not soldiers. Something closer to home than that, and worse in a particular way that close things are worse. I was there when it happened, and I did not speak. I have known every day since what that silence was worth. I know what it cost. I knew it before the week was out. There are things you see that don't stay outside of you. That is something I understood by the time I was 27 years old, and I have not unknowed it since. I will start where everything starts, which is before. I was born in 1837 in Polk County, Tennessee, in the spring. Last frost already past, my mother always said, as if the season itself was a mark of good fortune. My father was a farmer. His father had been a farmer. The land in our part of the county was folded up against the lower edge of the Unica Range, not flat, not generous, but it grew corn and tobacco and kept animals if you worked it right. My father worked it right. He was not a rich man, but he was a careful one, and careful in that country was almost the same thing. Polk County sat on the Tennessee side of the Georgia line. People came and went across that line without much ceremony. Families straddled it. A cousin of my mother's kept a farm 3 miles south, technically in Georgia, and we thought nothing of visiting. The mountains did not care about state lines, and neither did we. There were roughly 300 families in our part of the county when I was young, mostly Scots-Irish settlers, some Cherokee blood in a few families, though not spoken of directly, a handful of German families who had come down from North Carolina. We were not wealthy people as a group. We had no large plantations to speak of. Some men held a slave or two. My father did not, could not have afforded it, and would not have, I believe, though I cannot say with certainty, because men's reasons for things are often different from what they tell their wives and daughters. The slavery question was not simple here the way people later made it sound. Nothing was simple here. That is the first thing to understand about Polk County. My mother's name was Sarah. She had come from a family in McMinn County, one ridge north, and she knew how to do everything a woman needed to know. She could cure a hog, boil lye soap, set a broken finger, bring a calf. She taught me to sew before I could read, which was not unusual. She was not a warm woman, not cold either, but practical the way people get practical when they know the weather and the debt and the sickness that comes every few years and does not ask permission. She loved me in the way that means doing the work. I understood that later. I had 2 brothers. The elder, James Thomas, was 4 years above me. The younger, Cornelius, we called him Neil, was 2 years below. James Thomas enlisted in the Confederate Army in the spring of 1861, and was dead by the following spring. Not killed in battle, but of fever in a camp in Mississippi. We received a letter. My mother read it twice at the table, and then went outside and did not come in for an hour. When she came back in, she made supper. That was how it was done. Neil stayed home. He was lame in his left foot from a childhood accident with a wagon wheel, and the army did not want him. I do not know whether that was a relief to him or a shame, or both. He did not speak about it. He worked the farm alongside my father and kept his thoughts to himself, which was, I suppose, the family trait. I was married in 1859, age 22, which was considered late enough to remark upon, but not so late as to be remarkable. My husband's name was Eli Burnett. He was from a family 2 miles east, good people, a little louder than mine, but honest. He farmed. We had a place of our own by then, a small house on rented land that we were working toward owning. By the time the war began, we had been married 2 years, and I was carrying our first child. Our daughter Ruth came in November of 1861, then a boy in 1863, Henry, then another boy, Thomas, in 1866, the first one born after the worst of it was finished. The war did not come to us as enlistment first. It came to us as weather. It came as men on the roads who were not our men. It came as news from other counties, then closer counties, then the county itself. It came as a change in the air, the way a change in season changes the air, something you sense before you can name it. I keep a small piece of cloth in the back of a drawer in my bedroom, brown wool, cut from a hem. It has been there since 1863, and I have never washed it, and I have never thrown it away, and I have never been able to explain it to anyone who has found it. My granddaughter Nell asked me once, 2 winters ago, what it was from. I told her it was from an old dress. That is true, in the sense that it is a piece of cloth. It is true the way most lies are true. There is something in it that is not wrong, just not the whole of it. There are things you see that don't stay outside of you. The cloth is what stayed with me. Or rather, I stayed with it. I cannot always tell which direction that goes. Before I get to what the war made of us, I want to say what the county was, because if I do not say it, what came later will seem more simple than it was. We were not a unified people. I know that sounds strange to say about a county, but it is the truth of this particular one. There were families who had sons in the Confederate Army, and families who had sons in the Union Army, and families who had sons in both, and they all lived within sight of one another, and traded with one another, and in some cases were cousins. My father-in-law's brother had 2 boys. One went Confederate, one Union. They spoke to each other through their mother for 3 years, and then both came home, and they spoke directly again, and nobody made an announcement about it. That was just how it was. The mountains did not have ideology the way people in cities seem to. They had neighbors. My father had no strong feeling about the Confederacy. He was not a fire eater, but he distrusted the federal government with the specific distrust of a man whose family had been moving away from authority for 3 generations, and that distrust was not nothing. He did not enlist, being nearly 50 by then. He stayed on the land and waited. Eli, my husband, was 24 in 1861 and did not enlist either, and I will say plainly that I was grateful for it in a way I knew was not virtuous. I knew other women whose husbands had gone, and I saw what that did to a woman's days. The worry on top of the work without the second pair of hands, the not knowing that sits in you like something you cannot digest. I was glad Eli stayed. That gladness was real, and I never apologized for it. He stayed because the cause was not his, or that is what he said, and I believed him. He was also practical enough to know that a farm with no man on it in wartime was a different kind of danger, which turned out to be true. The woman I need to tell you about was named Cora Dunbar. She was perhaps 30 when the war reached us in earnest, older than me by 3 or 4 years. She had come to the county when she married, same as I had. Her husband, Alvin Dunbar, kept a small store in Benton, dry goods and hardware, and Cora kept house and helped in the store some days and was, as far as I knew, ordinary. She was not a close friend of mine. She was a neighbor in the larger sense, someone I saw at church, someone whose children played near mine at gatherings, someone I would stop to speak to on the road without thinking twice. She had a pleasant, long-jawed face and hands that were always a little rough from work. She wore her hair very plain, just parted and pinned. I want you to see her. That is the point of telling you about her hands and her face. She was a person. She was not a lesson or a sign. She was a woman who lived in Benton, Tennessee, and sold cloth and kept her children clean and was nobody remarkable, which is exactly the kind of person that what happened to her should never have happened to. I did not see it coming. Later I would try to think of whether I should have, whether there were signs. There were signs, some of them, but signs in wartime look different from signs in peace, because in wartime everything is slightly wrong, and it becomes hard to say which slightly wrong thing is the one you should have done something about. My daughter Ruth was 2 years old in the spring of 1863. She had just started talking in full sentences. I remember noticing that spring the way you notice things when you have a small child to show them to. The redbuds, the mud drying, the way the creek smelled after a rain. I remember the county still looking like itself. That was the last spring it did. That summer, the armies came through. Cora Dunbar's husband Alvin had a more complicated position than most because he kept the store, and the store had things that soldiers needed. By late 1863, there was hardly any stock left in the store. He had sold some, and some had been taken, and some he had hidden under the floorboards of their house. I knew about the hidden stock because Cora had told me when I stopped there in November to ask about thread. She said it quietly, not as a complaint, just as a fact. There's still some thread under the kitchen, she said, if you can use it. And she brought it up, and I bought it, and I paid her, and we did not discuss what was under the floor further. That piece of thread, brown wool, because she had no other color left. I used to mend a dress. I cut the leftover bit and put it in my sewing tin. That was the cloth I still have. It was ordinary then. It was just thread. That was before. I want to be careful here about how I explain the next part because the next part involves a man I knew. And when you're telling something about a person you knew, there's a pull to explain them too much or not enough. And I want to do neither. His name was Daniel Ford. He was from a family further up the ridge, a different valley from us, maybe 5 miles north. He was 30 years old or close to it. He had 2 brothers in the Confederate Army. He himself had not enlisted for reasons that were not publicly stated, but had to do, people believed, with a situation in the family, a farm that needed keeping or something else. I was never entirely clear. He was not considered a coward by most people. He was considered a man who was staying where he needed to stay. I had known him since childhood, more or less. Not well. You know a person the way you know all the names in a county. You know their face. You know their family. You know what people say about them. What people said about Daniel Ford was that he was proud and that he did not forget a slight and that he was, when things were ordinary, a perfectly decent man. He had done nothing to me. He had nothing against me. We were, in the general way of a small county, acquaintances. It was Daniel Ford who was present on the day in question. I will come to that. First, I need to tell you what the winter of 1863 was like, because that winter is part of the answer to why nobody spoke, and why I did not speak, and why the county that came out of the war was not the same county that went into it. The first time soldiers came through our road, it was July of 1863, and they were Confederate troops moving south. There were 40 or 50 of them, ragged, not in anything you would call proper uniform. Some had the gray jacket, some had pieces of it, some had nothing but homespun and a rifle. They asked for water, and we gave them water. They asked whether we had corn, and we said we had some, and they said they would need to take some, and they did. They left before dark. One of them, he could not have been more than 17, stopped at the fence post and looked at my vegetable garden for a long moment before he walked on. I do not know what he was looking at. Maybe nothing. Maybe home. We lost half a bushel of corn and a rope and one of the hens that happened to be too close to the road. That was the first time. I thought, well, that is what war is. Men taking things. We noted it and moved on. Later that same summer, the Union men came through, going north, different road, came at night, did not stop. We heard them from the bed, the sound of boots and horses on the packed dirt, and neither Eli nor I spoke until they were past, and then we did not speak for some time after that either. Ruth slept through it. By the fall of 1863, there was a regular coming and going on the roads of the county. The campaigns further south and west sent men through on their way from one place to another, and they needed food and they needed water and they needed whatever they could take, and they took it from whichever farm was nearest when they needed it. We lost another quarter of our corn. We lost a shovel. We lost a young pig in October that Eli had been planning to slaughter in November. But a group of 8 men in blue took it one afternoon while I was watching from the kitchen window, and one of them looked toward the house, but none of them came to the house, and I did not go outside. That is something I want to say plainly, because I think people who did not live through this may not understand it. You learned very quickly what to do when armed men came onto your property. You noted what they took. You did not go outside unless you had to. You did not argue. You kept the children inside, and you kept yourself still, and you waited for them to leave. Not because you were cowardly necessarily, but because you had a child and a husband and a farm that still had corn in it, and the man who argues about the pig loses the corn too, and sometimes more than that. That winter was hungry. Not starving. We were not starving, not on our farm, but hungry in the way that makes you careful about every pot and every jar, counts every piece of salt pork twice before you use it, makes you look at what you have put by and try to see whether it will last until the ground is soft enough to plant. Eli worked the farm through the cold months as if nothing had changed, which was its own kind of courage. He kept the animals fed and the wood cut and the fence repaired and did not complain about what had been taken in the fall. He was a quiet man, my husband, not cold, but contained. He kept his worry inside in the same way he kept everything else inside, and I respected that about him even when it was lonely. Ruth was talking constantly by then. She had opinions about everything: the chickens, the color of the sky, what she wanted for breakfast. Henry was just a few months old, nursing, not yet interesting to himself. I was managing both of them and the house and some of the animal work when Eli was busy elsewhere, and the days were full in the way that hard days are full, not pleasant, but not empty either. The church in Benton had stopped meeting regularly by December. This was not stated officially. Nobody announced that services were suspended, but people did not come the way they had, and the minister had left the county in October, and whoever filled in for him the few times anyone gathered did not seem to know what to say about what was happening, which I understood. There was not a Bible verse that covered it cleanly. Women met in each other's houses instead. This was practical and social at once. You could share news, share work, quilting, carding, shelling whatever was left to shell, and share the particular companionship of people who are all afraid of the same things and do not say so directly. You talked about the children. You talked about what you had heard from other counties. You traded information the way you traded anything else you needed, carefully, accurately, without waste. I went to Cora Dunbar's house twice that winter. The store was effectively closed. Alvin had decided to stop opening it, and I did not blame him. There was nothing left to sell, and the risk of someone taking not just the goods, but other things was too high. Cora's house was neat and cold, the fire small to save wood. She had 3 children, the oldest 7, the youngest maybe 3. They were thin but not sickly. She fed me tea made from dried something, I could not have told you what, and we sat and talked about nothing important for an hour each time, and then I went home. I liked Cora. I should say that plainly. I did not know her well, but what I knew, I liked. She was direct without being hard. She laughed at things that were actually funny. She was the kind of woman who paid attention to your face when you were talking, which not everyone does. I noticed that winter that something was off between Cora and Alvin. I noticed it the first visit and noticed it more the second. Nothing dramatic. Nothing I could have described in words to someone else. He came through the room while we were talking the second time, and there was something in how she did not look at him, or how he did not look at her, a gap between them where there should have been something ordinary. I filed it away. It was not my business. Daniel Ford came to town in January of that winter. He was not a town man. He came in for supplies now and then, same as anyone else from the outlying farms. But in January, he came in twice in 1 week, which was unusual. I saw him both times on the road near the store, or what had been the store. The second time he was talking to Alvin Dunbar at the front of the building, and I could not hear what they were saying. I thought nothing of it at the time. There was too much else to think about. The weather was hard that January, sleet twice, hard frost most nights, and the animals needed extra attention, and Henry had a chest cough that kept me up 3 nights running, and I was tired in the way that makes it hard to pay attention to anything outside of what is immediately in front of you. The cough passed, the sleet stopped. February came, slightly warmer. In March, the armies moved again, and one morning before dawn I heard boots in the road again and did not get up to look. When I went out at daylight, there were mule tracks in the mud and 3 fence rails knocked over, and the cow was spooked and would not come to me until midday. Spring was just starting. It was coming up green the way it does in the Tennessee hills, everything insisting on itself. Ruth had learned to climb the fence post, which terrified me. Henry was starting to hold his head up well. Eli was getting the fields ready. I was doing what needed doing. And one morning in April I went into Benton for flour. The flour was sold from a house on the east side of town by a woman named Mrs. Hale, whose son had a mill a half-mile out. It was not a formal shop. You went to the door and asked, and if she had it, you bought it, and if she did not, you came back in a week. I had done it 4 or 5 times already that winter. It was ordinary. I left Ruth with Eli's mother, who lived a quarter-mile from us in a small house on our road. Henry Lai carried. The walk to Benton was 1.5 miles, which was not far in ordinary weather, and it was a mild April morning, cool but dry, the road mostly firm. I did my errand at Mrs. Hale's house and bought what I needed. I had the flour in a sack and Henry in the crook of my other arm, and I was starting back when I went past the back of the Dunbar property on Cora's side. Their house sat a little off the main road, down a short lane with a row of poplar saplings along it. I did not plan to stop. I had not planned to see her that day, but I heard something. I stopped before I knew I had stopped. I want to be careful about how I say this. I'm trying to tell you what I know and what I do not know, and where I need to separate the two. What I heard was voices raised, not screaming, not what you would call screaming, but voices with something wrong in them, a quality of pressure, the way a voice sounds when something is being pushed down in it. I heard Cora's voice, and I heard a man's voice that I recognized, though it took me a moment, because the sound of it was not what I was used to hearing from that man. It was Daniel Ford's voice. I stood in the road for a moment with the flour sack and the baby, and I thought, this is not my business. That's what I thought. I thought it plainly, like a fact. This is not my business. Then I walked down the lane a short way, not to the house. I stopped before the house. There was a gap in the poplars, and I could see the side yard and the back of the house, and a part of the kitchen porch from where I stood. What I saw, I will describe without embellishment, because it does not need embellishment, and because this is the point in the telling, where I most need to be plain. Cora Dunbar was on the kitchen porch, backed against the wall of the house. Her dress, it was the brown wool dress, the one she wore for work, because it was morning and she had been working. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, the seam pulled open. She was not fighting, because you stop fighting when you understand that fighting is making it worse. Her face was turned to the side, and her eyes were looking at the poplars. Her eyes were looking directly at where I was standing. I do not know if she could see me. The light was behind me, morning light, and the gap in the poplars was narrow. I cannot tell you for certain whether she saw me. I've spent 55 years not knowing whether she saw me. Daniel Ford had her by the wrist. He was speaking to her in a low, even voice. I could not hear the words, just the tone. The tone was a man telling a woman how things were going to be. I stood there. I had flour and a baby, and I stood in a poplar lane in April, and I did not go forward, and I did not call out. I will tell you why. It will not make it better. It is just the truth. I will tell you the reason I did not speak, and then I will tell you what it cost. And I want to say clearly before I do either of those things that I am not offering the reason as an excuse. A reason is not the same as an excuse. I have had 55 years to understand the difference. The reason was Daniel Ford's brothers. His brothers were in the Confederate Army, and Daniel Ford was known to have connections to Confederate sympathizers in the county. Men who were not soldiers themselves, but who were doing what soldiers sometimes asked of them, noting which farms had Union sympathizing families, noting which men had spoken against the Confederate cause, noting which women were alone too much. There had been a man 2 hollers over. His name was Graves, I will not use his first name, who had spoken openly in favor of the Union and had woken up one morning in February to find his barn burned. Nobody charged anyone with it. Nobody seemed to try. Eli had said nothing publicly about which side he was on, but Eli's older brother had Union sympathies, and this was known. We were, in the calculation of that county, not safe. Not unsafe enough to have been touched yet, but not safe. There was a line between those two conditions, and we were close enough to it that I thought about it. That is why I did not call out. I thought, if I call out, if I make an accusation, if I tell what I saw, the man has connections, and I have a husband and 2 children and a farm, and this county does not protect the person who speaks against a man like that. Not in wartime, not in 1864 in Polk County, Tennessee. That was the calculation. I'm not saying it was a wrong calculation. I'm not saying it was a right one. I am saying it was the calculation I made in the space of a few seconds in a poplar lane while I was holding a flour sack and a baby. I walked back to the road. I walked home. I put the flour away and put Henry down for his sleep and stood in my kitchen for a while with my hands on the table. My hands were shaking, but only a little. The piece of brown wool was in my sewing tin in the next room, the thread I had bought from Cora in November. I'm not sure why I thought of it at that moment. I do not know what made me go and take it out of the tin and hold it. I put it in the pocket of my apron, and I carried it there for the rest of that day and that evening. And that night, after Eli was asleep, I took it out and folded it and put it in the back of the top drawer of the chest, where it has been ever since. I did not tell Eli. I did not tell my mother. I did not tell anyone. That is the plain fact of it. I saw what I saw, and I went home and I did not speak. Cora Dunbar died 6 months later, in October of 1864. She died of what was called a fever, which was not untrue in the strict sense. There was fever at the end. But she had been sick all summer in a way that the women of the county noticed and understood without saying what they understood. She had been put down before that fever began. She had been put down in ways that a woman can be put down when there is a war, and her husband is not what a husband should be, and the county is looking at other things. I went to her funeral. I stood at the graveside. Her children were there, the three of them, standing together the way children do when they do not fully understand what is happening. Her oldest boy had her long jaw. Her youngest girl had her eyes. I stood at the graveside and I kept my face still, and I did not cry. And after it was over, I walked home, and I did not say anything to anyone about what I had seen in April, and I have not said it since, not until now. There are things you see that don't stay outside of you. What I saw that morning went inside of me and has lived there for 55 years. I've set the table around it. I've raised children around it. I've buried a husband around it. It has not gotten smaller. I had thought when I was younger that it might get smaller with time, the way grief sometimes does. But this is not grief exactly. It is something else. It is the knowledge of what you did not do, and that kind of knowledge does not diminish. It just becomes more familiar. I want to go back to the day itself a little more, because I have told you the broad shape of it, and now I want to tell you the specific things, the things I still carry. The light was the particular pale gold light of early morning in April in that valley, when the sun has just come over the ridge and everything is still cold but the light is warm. I remember it exactly. I've never been able to look at that quality of April light without being returned to that lane. Cora's hair was down. She had not finished dressing when whatever had started. That detail has always stayed with me. The hair down. It meant she had not been expecting company. It meant Daniel Ford had come to that house early before she was ready, which tells you something about the way he understood his right to be there. Her eyes when they were looking at the poplars were, I don't know how to say this exactly. They were not asking for help, or maybe they were, and she had already stopped expecting it to come. There was something in them that I recognized at 27 as a woman recognizing something in another woman. The look of a person who has understood what is happening and has made herself go somewhere else in her mind. That look. I recognized it, and I turned and walked away from it. And that is the thing I cannot make cleaner no matter how I try. I've thought often about whether speaking would have helped her. This is not a small question. In the arithmetic of that county in 1864, a woman speaking against Daniel Ford would not have produced a justice. There was no functioning court. There was no sheriff who was doing what a sheriff does in ordinary times. There was war. There were men with guns on the roads and no one to appeal to whose authority held. I have thought about this arithmetic for 55 years. But here is what I keep arriving at every time I work through it. The question is not only whether speaking would have helped her, the question is also what it meant to her that I did not speak, whether she saw me or not, whether she knew someone had been there and had gone away, whether that was in some way I cannot measure, its own kind of damage, separate from and in addition to everything else Daniel Ford did to her. I cannot know. That is the particular torture of it. I cannot go back and ask her. I cannot see into that April morning from where I stand now. I can only know what I knew and what I did and what I chose and what it cost. What it cost Cora, I will not pretend to calculate. I'm not entitled to calculate that. Daniel Ford lived through the war. He farmed for another 20 years, married, had 4 children, died in 1891 of something wrong in his heart. which I did not think was poetic justice, but which some part of me noted, that Wednesday morning when I heard it from my neighbor. He was not known as a bad man by most people in the county. He was known as a proud man, a man who kept to himself, a man who was difficult if you crossed him. He was not known as what he was, and I was part of why he was not known as what he was. I knew it, and I kept it. That makes me part of it. There is no sentence I can put around that which makes it different. Alvin Dunbar left the county after Cora died. I heard he went to Georgia. I never learned more than that. His children were taken in by Cora's sister from McMinn County, who came and collected them in November of 1864, 3 children standing in the yard with a bundle each. I watched them go from my road. I did not know the sister. I did not say anything to her. I put those children in my mind next to the cloth in the drawer. They're still there. The rest of 1864 was the war finishing its work on the county. The armies came through twice more, Union troops both times, doing what armies do when they're tired and far from home, and their supply lines are uncertain. By the end of that year, we had no pigs left, a reduced corn supply, 2 fence rows down that we could not afford to repair before winter. My father-in-law died in December of 1864, heart. He was 64. Eli sat with him the last night and came home in the morning with the particular stillness of a man who has been with death and is not ready to speak about it yet. We buried him in the Methodist cemetery in January. The ground was hard, and it took 2 men most of a morning to get the hole right. I stood at that grave, too, on the cold ground, and I thought about standing at Cora's grave 2 months before. And I thought about how many graves there were by then in that county, and I thought, the war does this to a place. It opens the ground and keeps opening it. Eli did not know about Cora. I made sure of that. Not because I thought he would not have believed me. I think he would have believed me, but because what he would have done with the belief frightened me. Eli was not an aggressive man, but he was a man with a particular sense of account. He would have felt that something was owed. And in 1864 in Polk County, attempting to collect what was owed from a man like Daniel Ford could get a person killed, or worse, could get a farm burned, and then we would have nothing. So I kept what I knew inside myself, and I did not give it to my husband to carry. I told myself this was protection, and it was protection. Protection is not the same as right. In the spring of 1865, the war ended, or so it was called. It ended in the way that wars end in places like ours, gradually, unevenly, like a fire burning out, still hot in some places when it has already gone cold in others. The men who were left came home. Some of the men who came home were not what they had been when they left, which was not surprising. You cannot send a man through 3 years of war and get back the same person. The county began what people called rebuilding. I always thought that word was too simple for what actually happened, which was more like reshaping. The county after the war was not the county before the war, minus some destruction. It was a different arrangement of people and loyalties and silences, and the silences were a kind of architecture, too. They held things up and kept things apart and defined the shape of what you could and could not say. My son Thomas was born in 1866, the first winter after. He came easy, which was a mercy. I was 29 and tired in a way I had not been tired before my second child. a tiredness that was not only of the body. Eli said I seemed far away for a while after Thomas came, and I said it was the tiredness of 3 children, and he accepted that because it was also true. The cloth was in its drawer. I had looked at it twice since April of the previous year, both times, without understanding fully why I looked. I was not sentimental about objects in general. I did not keep things I did not use, but I kept it. I did not try very hard to explain why. There are things you see that don't stay outside of you. The cloth was outside of me, folded in a drawer, but what it pointed to was not outside of me. It was as deep in me as anything I had, deeper than I could see for a long time. The years after the war are not the part people ask about, and I understand why. The war is the event, and everything after is just life. But the after is where I lived with it. The after is 55 years. Eli and I had a good marriage, as good as most and better than some. He was not easy to know, but he was reliable, and he was kind in the particular way of a man who does not say much, but acts when acting is called for. We paid off the land by 1873. We raised Ruth and Henry and Thomas and a 4th child, a daughter named Clara, who came in 1869 and was the most talkative of the 4 by far. We had Christmases. We had a bad year in 1879 when the crops were poor and we ate thin and borrowed. We had better years around it. I was a good mother. I believe that. I was present with my children in the ways that matter. I taught them. I fed them. I nursed them through sickness. I paid attention to who they were. Ruth grew up to be a school teacher. Henry married well and farms about 3 miles from me now, which is a comfort. Thomas moved north, which was his right. Clara's dead. She died in 1904 of something the doctor called a growth and could not help. And that loss is its own country that I'll not try to enter here. I was steady. People in the county said that about me my whole life. She's steady, Ida Mae. You can count on her. She was. I went to services every Sunday, and I listened to the sermons, and I took communion, and I said my prayers, and I believed in God in the way I had been raised to believe, not with great fire, but with a settled sense that the accounting was real and that I was in it. What I did not do for 55 years was speak to God directly about the specific thing I had done and not done in April of 1864. I spoke around it. I prayed in the neighborhood of it. But I did not say the plain words to him, any more than I said them to any person, because I was afraid of what would come back. Eli died in 1901. Heart, same as his father. He was 66. He had been slowing down for 2 years before it, and the last year he was not working much, mostly sitting on the porch and watching things, which was not a bad way to spend time. I sat with him 2 nights before the end, and on the second night he held my hand for a long while without speaking, and I held his and looked at him and thought, this man has lived alongside me for 42 years, and he does not know the shape of everything inside me, and I have never decided if that was right or wrong. He died at dawn, which was very like him, not making a fuss about it, just finishing when the time came. I put his hands together and went and woke Ruth, who was living with me by then, and then I was a widow, and I have been a widow since, which is 17 years now. In the years after Eli died, I found myself alone with the silence more than I had been before. The children were grown and gone or close to it. The days were quieter, and in the quiet, the thing I had kept for so long was louder. It was not always loud. It was not always in the front of things, but it was always there, steady in the way that I was steady, underneath everything else, giving a certain shape to how I moved through the world, how much I permitted myself to be easy, how quickly I came back to seriousness when I had let myself rest for a moment. It lived in me the way a stone lives in a field you've plowed around for 40 years. You know where it is. You do not always think about it, but you know where it is. Ruth has lived with me since Eli died. She is 57 now and never married, which was her choice, and I have not said much about it. She's like me in some ways. She keeps things inside. She's better educated than I was, and more capable of putting the world in order in her mind. But she has my same habit of quiet, and I have sometimes wondered whether I gave that to her, and whether it was a good thing to give. She does not know what I am carrying. I have never told her. My granddaughter Nell, that is Henry's oldest girl. She is 23 now, and she visits me regularly, which I appreciate. She's curious about everything, including the past, including the war, including what it was like. She asks me questions the way the young ask questions, directly and without embarrassment. What was it like, Grandma, when the soldiers came? Were you scared? What did you do? I answer the parts I can answer. The soldiers taking corn, the cold winter, the way the county looked after, how long it took for things to feel ordinary again. I answer those things, and they are true, and they satisfy her. And she does not know to ask the next question, because she does not know there is a next question. 2 years ago, she found the cloth in the drawer while she was helping me with the room. She held it up, that small folded piece of brown wool, and said, "Grandma, what is this?" And I said, "It was from an old dress." And she looked at it a moment, and then set it down, not carefully, just set it down, and went on with what she was doing. I picked it up after she left the room, and put it back in the drawer, and looked at it for a moment before I closed the drawer. 53 years old by then, that cloth. 53 years in a drawer. I have thought often in these last years about what it would mean to say it. Not to say it to anyone in particular, necessarily. Nell is sweet, but she is 23, and she is not who you confess to, but just to say it into the world, to move it from inside to outside, to let it be a thing that exists in air rather than a thing that exists only in me. I tried once. It was about 5 years after Eli died. I was at the grave. I go in spring when the redbuds are out, because Eli liked redbuds. There was one at the edge of the cemetery he would stop and look at, and I was standing there, and I said out loud, not loudly, I said, "I saw something done to a woman and I did not speak." That was all I said. My voice stopped after that, but it was out of me for a moment, and that felt like something. I do not know what it felt like exactly. Not relief. Something more like acknowledgement. Like the county itself had heard it. The hills and the cemetery and the April air. Like Cora Dunbar, wherever she was, had heard it. I do not know what I think happens after death. I was raised Methodist, and I have attended Methodist services for 81 years, and I believe in the general outline of it. But I do not know, in the specific sense, whether Cora Dunbar is somewhere that allows her to hear a woman speaking quietly at a grave in Tennessee. I do not know if she would want to hear it, or if she would have anything to say in return, or if what I did was too deep a failure for anything said at a grave to reach. What I know is that she had long-jawed face and rough hands from work, and 3 children who went to McMinn County with a bundle each. What I know is that she was 30 years old and she was on her own kitchen porch when it happened to her. What I know is that I was 26 years old in that poplar lane, and I made a calculation, and I walked away. That is the whole of it, those 3 facts together. I have not been able to put them down for 55 years, and I don't expect to put them down now. But I am 81 years old, and I am going to say the rest of it plainly before I am done. There's a question I have had to sit with for a long time, which is whether I am a bad person. I do not mean that as a way of asking you to reassure me. I mean it as the plain question that any person has to answer who has done what I did. I have turned it over for decades. I've looked at it from different angles. I've sometimes concluded one thing and sometimes the other, and more often landed in a place between, which is where I think the truth probably lives. I was afraid. That is true. The fear was real. The threat was real. A barn had burned 2 hollers over. There was no law that held in that county in 1864. Daniel Ford had connections, and my family did not have the kind of standing that protects you from a man with connections. I was 26 years old with a baby in my arms. I am not going to look back from 81 and say that a 26-year-old woman with 2 children and a vulnerable household was wrong to be afraid. I will not do that. But here's what I also know. The fear was real, and I used it. I used it the way you use a tool. I picked it up and I put it between myself and what I had seen, and I said, I am afraid, and I turned around. And the fear was real, but the using of it was a choice. I made the choice, and Cora Dunbar paid for the choice. Not only my choice, she paid for a great many people's choices, starting with Daniel Ford's. But mine was one of them. There are things you see that don't stay outside of you. What I saw went inside me and became something I have organized my life around without ever naming it directly, and the organizing is its own kind of testimony. The silence was loud, even when I was the only one who could hear it. My children are good people. Ruth is good. Henry is good. Thomas, from what I hear, is good. I do not know how much of that is me and how much is Eli and how much is just who they turned out to be. But I have wondered sometimes whether the steadiness I passed on to them, the capacity to be still, to carry things, to not break down, whether that steadiness has something in it that came from practicing for 55 years how to hold a thing inside and keep walking. I do not know whether that is a gift or a damage I handed them. I am 81 years old. I have not been to a doctor in several years because there is nothing a doctor can do that would be useful at 81 in Benton, Tennessee. My heart is slow. My hands shake in the morning until I have been up for a while. I do not sleep long or well, which is not new. I have not slept easily for most of my life, and the early morning hours have been the hours I have done my worst and most honest thinking. Last spring, in April, I was sitting on the porch in the early morning, and the light came over the ridge in that pale gold way it has, and I closed my eyes, and I let myself think about Cora Dunbar directly. I do not always do that. Usually I think around her the way I used to plow around the stone in the field. But that morning I let myself think about her directly. I thought about her face, the long jaw, the hair that was down because it was early and she had not been expecting anyone. The eyes turned toward the poplars. I thought she was a person. I've always known that. But that morning I let myself feel it without flinching, without immediately moving to the calculation and the fear and the explanation. She was a person, and she was 28 or 30 years old, and she was on her own porch in the morning, and she looked toward the poplars, and maybe she saw me, and maybe she did not. But either way, I was there, and I walked away. I sat with that for a long time in the April light. I did not cry. I am not a crying woman, but I sat with it. And then I went inside and opened the drawer and took out the cloth. It is a small piece of brown wool, 3 inches by maybe 4, cut from a hem with scissors, clean edge on one side, raw on the other. If you did not know what it was from, you would say it was nothing, a scrap. Something a woman kept because cloth was not wasted and it might be useful. It was never useful. I've never used it for anything. It has been in that drawer for 55 years, folded the same way, twice lengthwise, then across, the way I folded it the night I moved it from my apron pocket to the chest. I have unfolded it 4 or 5 times over the years and then folded it back the same way. I do not know why the same way. It just seemed right to put it back as it was. I am going to say plainly what I have not said plainly for 55 years. I saw a man harm a woman, and I did not speak. I knew the man, and I was afraid of what speaking would cost me and my family, and that fear was not invented. It was real, and it was grounded in the actual danger of that county in that year. And none of that makes what I did right. Both things are true, and I am not going to spend my last years trying to make one of them untrue. Cora Dunbar died in October of 1864, 6 months after what I saw, and I have always believed, though no one would have written it down that way, that what happened on her porch in April was part of what killed her. Not all of it, but part. And I knew, and I did not speak, and so I am part of that chain, a small link in it, but a link. I have not spoken of this to Ruth or to Henry or to any living person in this county. The county has changed, and Daniel Ford is dead, and Cora Dunbar is 54 years in the ground, and there is nothing my speaking now will do for anyone in a practical sense. I'm not saying it because it will help. I'm saying it because I am 81 years old, and I am tired of the weight of keeping the unsaid inside me, and because Cora Dunbar's name deserves to be said by someone who knew what happened to her. Her name was Cora Dunbar. She had a long-jawed face and rough hands and 3 children. She kept thread under her kitchen floorboards in 1863 because the soldiers had taken most of what was in the store. She laughed at things that were actually funny. She paid attention when you were talking to her. She was a person. She was a specific person. She was not a lesson or a symbol of what war does. She was a woman named Cora who lived in Benton, Tennessee, and she died at 30 or 31, and what happened to her was not right, and the man who did it was known by people who did not speak, and I was one of them. There are things you see that don't stay outside of you. The cloth is still in the drawer. I'm not going to wash it, and I am not going to throw it away. I do not think I will. But I have told you what it is from now, which I have never told anyone. It is from the hem of Cora Dunbar's brown wool work dress, the thread I bought from her the November before she died, when she came up through the kitchen floor to get it for me, and I paid her, and we did not talk about what was under the floor, only about the thread itself. I cut it out of the sewing tin the night after I saw what I saw, and I have carried it since, and it will probably be in that drawer when I am gone, and whoever finds it will not know what it is, and that is all right. I know what it is. I have always known. I am 81 years old. I am not asking to be forgiven. I am not telling this so that someone will say, "You were afraid, and it was wartime, and you were young, and you cannot blame yourself." You can blame me. I have blamed myself every day for 55 years, and the blame is accurate, and I am not looking to be rid of it. I am telling it because I am done keeping it entirely inside. Because Cora Dunbar was a person, and she deserves to have been seen by at least one other person who says so. Because I was in that poplar lane in April, and I was a witness, and a witness who keeps silent is something, and I know what that something is, and I am not going to die pretending I do not know. That is all. That is what I have to say. There is no ending beyond this except the usual one, and I am not in a hurry for it, but I am not afraid of it either. I have done the hard work. I have said the thing. The drawer is shut. The cloth is folded. The light this morning is the same light it always is in April, pale gold coming over the ridge, the way it has come over that ridge since before I was born, and will come after I am gone. I saw what I saw. I know what it was. I said it.